Can you hear me? Cool, and we're live. So, welcome everyone. We're at the first online PHP Cape Town meetup. We're keeping it pretty simple tonight. We're going to have two talks from myself and Dominic Arendse. Dominic is going to talk on permission-based role systems in PHP. So, if any of you use systems like Laravel, some common use patterns might be using a role with a role ID and making your tiers like that, but maybe we should go with permission-based systems and you can create your own custom roles from that, and we'll see how that goes. Then after that, I'll be giving a short talk on interesting self-hosted apps in the PHP community. And after all that's said and done, we're gonna see if the raffle system works. I'm gonna try and keep it to only people that are actually watching the stream, but if it doesn't work out, we'll make a plan. So, let's start with Dominic. You ready, Dom? I'm actually not hearing anything. Whoops. Hold on. Let me try something quick. Okay, Dom, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
There we go.
Can you see me?
Yeah, got you. Perfect. Ready whenever.
Cool. Hi, everybody. I'm Dominic, and I'm CEO and founder of a company called Chartered. And short and sweet, Chartered specializes in cloud-based management software, and it's all about streamlining business processes and taking companies that's more used to, I would say, manual or more traditional processes, and taking them into the cloud. Yeah, and I'll be just switching over my screen shortly. But today I'm going to be talking, like Nick mentioned already, about robust permissions-based role systems. Just give me a sec to switch over.
Can't have a stream without technical difficulties.
And you see that.
Yeah, we got you perfect. Let me just remove my
Cool.
pineapple. There we go.
So, what is robust permissions-based role systems? Before I could actually get to answering that question or making that statement, there's a few concepts I have to introduce you guys to. So firstly would be role-based access control. So short and sweet, it's nothing too hectic. It's just an approach to restrict and or limit system access to authorized users. Like Nick also mentioned, most of us quite used to, if user role ID is XYZ, we then grant access to certain user functionality or certain dashboard, admin dashboard functionality. And role-based access control consists primarily of roles and privileges. Each role having different policies or privileges that we then apply to users or user groups. And This concept is quite important because it lays down the foundation for how we think and express user access to our backend systems or admin dashboards and APIs and so on. The next thing we have to look at then is the types of role systems or the types of role relationship systems. This is important because we need to think about how we are giving the users access and how this access relates within or to our system. How does the type of user relate to the access granted? How does one role perhaps relate to another? And there's three main examples that's always available. It's like the first thing that happens when you Google role-based access control. The first one that might pop up is user role. So this is simply just the relationship between the user and the role that's related to it. Admin user role or app user role. And in of itself, it sort of explains the role or the premise that the user itself plays in the system. The next is the role-role relationship, which sounds quite funny to me to say it too fast. But this is simply just the relationship between various roles. You might have an admin role, which has other roles beneath it. So in this example I state here, a member role is perhaps a subset of admin roles. Admins might have certain privileges, and you want to create roles that relate to that same role, but that have lesser privileges. Third and final type of relationship you might commonly come across is role and permissions. And again, this is just the relationship between the role and the permissions or the policies or the privileges that comes with that specific role. An admin role might have read and write access to the user data, where a member role might only be able to read user data. And again, it's just a way of thinking that will help us further express user access and security policies when we look at how we build up and architect our backend systems or just various systems in general. But for me, it's mostly a bunch of boring stuff. It's all just semantics. And what's truly important here is obviously implementing these sort of access controls and security policies. And let's have a bit of a look at that. In my experience, I've come across a lot of interesting implementations of roles and role-based access. Nick mentioned a good example earlier. You would do access control based on the role ID of a user. You might check a more in-depth system where you actually build out these role relationships, and that's where like robust permission-based role systems comes into play. But I'll run you guys through sort of these various different statements and logic and how you can build on top of that to get more complex or more granular systems. I'm sure you guys can relate to this. You start a new project, the brief comes in, and it's simply just there'll be an admin dashboard with admin users only, and there'll be a front-end app or a front-end that has app users only. And I know that as data grows, as systems grow, it's never that simple. The next thing that might start to happen is we want to grant access to certain people on the admin dashboard, but we don't necessarily want to give them access to create or update or delete data as they please. And hence introduction of more policies into the backend. And depending on how you've structured this, it can actually evolve into quite a big mess. But let's start off with a simple sort of statement that you'd see when you sort of implement these types of policies. I'm sure most of you have seen, if the user role is X, then we grant them access to Y resources. It's very simple, it's very easy to implement, and we can then reverse or inverse this statement, and we can play around a lot with it. We might on the back end say if the user role is admin, we let them in. On the app side, we might inverse that and say if the user role is not an admin, we'll let them in. But like I said, it's quite a simple statement that can be played around quite easily and will allow us to sort of give access functionally to a lot of the functionalities in our admin dashboards or in our apps or in our systems. And this is another way of expressing it. So we might say if the user, like I said, moving away from maybe integer-based comparisons, if role ID is 12345, then grant them access. I've seen a lot of slugs. If role slug is admin, then do this. So this is more resonating with that fact. If user roles has a specific role, then grant them access. But again, as systems grow, as data evolve and get bigger, and we want to sort of gain more insight out of the data to get better understanding of what's going on with our apps, with our systems in general, we want to move away from this way of thinking, ideally. And the reason for that is want to replace that so that we can sort of stay away from having to constantly code. I mean, I've seen this happen where we sort of implement a lot of these tiny if statements across the whole backend system. And if you understand and know exactly where they're placed, it's all good. But every time features get expanded on, having to copy and paste and repeat all of these if statements and role checks all over the backend system is not quite ideal. But there isn't a way to get a low impact yet granular and scalable access control using a more robust permissions-based role system. And where do we start with something like that? We start looking at an if statement like this. So if user roles has a specific role, and that role access is perhaps create, delete, update, so on and so forth, and they have access to the specific resource, then we grant them access. So it's still quite simple enough to understand offhand, but there's so much more flexibility and so much more, I would use the fake word, dynamicness that's going on here. And it gives us more control over what we are trying to achieve in terms of access with our backend system. And the advantage of doing this means that we have less code, depending on how we implement this, which I would come to next is where and how we implement this. We end up having less code and we end up not repeating ourselves. So it's quite a dry principle. It's quite lean. And moving on would then be where and how do we implement role-based access control? So it's really all up to you. Do you do it in a middleware? Do you use gates and policies for anyone that's quite familiar with the Laravel PHP framework? Again, it's really all up to you on how you do this, because the logic behind it is simple enough. In my example or my live demonstration, what I've done is I've gone ahead and implemented quite simply in a middleware. It made sense at the time, did it quite a while back, and I've actually never looked back after implementing this. And yeah, I'm going to be switching over now to just a bit of code and my live demonstration so you guys can actually see how it's all done. And yeah, I apologize for the long introduction to my live demonstration. For me, theory is also quite a bit boring, but it's a necessary evil that we sort of need so we can understand exactly what we're doing and how things work. I'll just be switching over my screen to my code. Nick, can you still see whether my code is now presenting to the stream?
Yeah, we got it. It's good.
So it's a simple model way. It's called redirect if not privileged. And like I mentioned before, this is where the various types of access comes into play. In this specific context, what I went for was I was thinking about all the different URIs in the admin dashboard, and obviously I built it in a RESTful way. So I'm using the HTTP methods to give context to what the user is trying to do. So in the handle method over here, it's not too Laravel centric. It's not too Laravel specific. Most PHP frameworks will be able to implement this, or if you written your own framework, it's quite easy to implement because the code is quite simple. But as you can see, all I'm doing is I'm getting the path or the URI. I'm then getting the method, the HTTP method, which is either get, post, put, or delete. I'm getting the currently authenticated user. And then from there, we're looking at the user roles, and the default state for this is privileged false, because we want to start off with this.
Could you zoom in a bit, please?
A bit.
Yeah, perfect.
It's much better.
It's good. Yeah. Maybe a bit out. Yeah.
Let's go a bit.
Cool.
So the different. This is an array which I use. I use the key, which is the HTTP method, to translate that into an action. Something quite simple. We know that whenever we are processing a get HTTP method, it means that we are basically requesting read access. A post means create. A put means update. Doesn't really matter in this case whether we want to update something partially or in whole. And then delete simply means delete. There are two other components that's quite important to implementing a system like this. Obviously, it's the middleware. It is then the database tables and the different relationships or models that's included there, and then also the UI and the UX for the admin dashboard. But I will be running through all of them, so don't stress too much. I want to say that. But yeah, so how the user relates to the various roles and privileges, I just open the database over here. We have our users table. We then have the pivot table, which expresses the relationship between the different user roles and the user or the users. And then we then have the various roles. I'll get to it in a bit in why I have this order over here. Like I said, this middleware and this way of thinking, it's a foundation that you're laying, and you can further expand on that as you need in specific places or contexts within your backend or in your system. And then we have the actual user roles, and then we have the actual role privileges. So these are all the privileges attached to a specific user role. And yeah, like I said, we start off not being privileged at all. So what we firstly need to do is we need to get all the roles that this user has. We run through every single role. We then check all the privileges for that specific role we are referencing. If they have privileges, we continue in here. If they don't, we don't really bother. It's a bit redundant, but I did this in a rush because I had to really onboard someone in like the next day or two, and I didn't want to give them too much access to all the sensitive data that I have in my admin dashboard yet at that point in time. But yeah, we then loop through all the different privileges. And like I said earlier, it's quite easy to sort of translate the HTTP method to a specific action. So all we are doing is we're taking that method and we're using it as a key lookup in this array and that maps out directly to an action. So if this was a GET request, the action would be read. If this was a POST, create, and so on and so forth. And if we get an action back, then that's quite nice. So here I'm dynamically inserting the action. So if we look at the table over here for privileges, there are read, create, update, and delete columns. And with this being now a string that I can populate over here, all I'm doing is dynamically replacing it. So if this action was create, I'm then referring to the create column on the privilege table. If it was delete or update, so on and so forth, that's what I'm doing over here. And this is just a bit of playing around with the logic. If it's a falsy, meaning maybe the action's not set, this will be false, so this will fail immediately for that, granting them privileges. If it does get the action back but it's false, it will do the same thing, it would fail. But if it gets back the specific column value and it's true, then it means it will pass that logical check over there. And then this is akin to something you'll see in a mathematics book in terms of bot math. So we first want to check whether they meet either of these two statements over here. So we're just using a bit of built-in Laravel functionality, but all it's doing is checking whether the URI that they are accessing is something that exists for that specific privilege. There's also different ways in the admin dashboard you can play around with it. Let's say we want to only give them access to the parent URI page. We can do that. If we want to give them access to everything, we can do that as well. If we want to give them access to specific pages, we can do that as well. And that's why these are all check over here to check whether it's specific or a more wildcard statement. And if they meet all of that, I would say checks, then we grant them the privilege. We break out of this for each immediately because we don't need to check any other privileges. And then we break out of here the bigger role check as well. They can have multiple roles, but if you find the role that obviously gives them access to whatever they are granting access towards or requesting access for, then you don't need to continue looping through all of those. And then, yeah, if they are not privileged, we just abort with a 4.4 again, some nice built-in Laravel functionality. But all this does is it just returns a HTTP status or response code of 4.1. Sorry, and that would mean that they don't have the necessary authorization to access that resource. If they do, it will just continue down the stack because this is a global middleware. So every single request that gets hit on the admin dashboard will go through this. Scalability wise, I'm not having thousands or millions of users that will be hitting the admin dashboard. But if I was to optimize this right now, an easy way to do that is, because if we look at database reads and writes, this doesn't really read from the database. It's getting all the user information from the session. This is a read from the database, which gets all the roles for that user. And then looping through every role, every time we get a new role and get their privileges, that's a read from the database. So the easy way to make this a bit more efficient is to just lazy load the privileges at the point where we are getting the roles, and then just swap around and play a bit more with the variables and how we loop through each role. Yeah, and the end result of building a UI or UX for something like this would just be, let me just sharing, switching to a specific tab, thing like this. So Nick, can you guys, can the stream see my window?
Yeah,
Cool. So it's just something nice, simple, not too hectic. This is the developer section in my admin dashboard. You can create a role. All the role is a name and an order, and whether they are visible or not. So where the role order and the visibility comes into play is, if you, I quickly figured out that I was granting other users a role which allows them to create more users, maybe an admin user or a super admin user, but I didn't want to have them, I didn't want to give them the ability to create roles that they shouldn't be creating, or users with the roles that they shouldn't be creating. So what the role order allows us to do is, we only allow them to create roles that's equal to the order that they have or lower. Akin to something in a real organization, you wouldn't have a intern come in and then suddenly start creating directors for the company necessarily. So that's the problem or the issue that the role order allows us to overcome. And then visibility, when they create a user resource or create a new user, all that this does is this tells us whether this role should show up in that selectable drop down or not. And yeah, that's all you need to create a user or create a role. On each role, you'll then be able to see all the users and then the privileges. So it's quite straightforward. If I was to introduce a new backend section called settings or configurations, I would just go create privilege. Depending on the URI that I call it, I would say configurations. Maybe I want to give them only access to a sub page and call that configuration settings, just for lack of a better example. Then I can give them access to that child page of the configuration section, and then I can grant them specific actions. And as you guys can see, again, what this allows us to do is, as I'm introducing new functionality, new views and resources into the backend, I then don't have to go back and then code newer I would say access controls at each of those controllers or each of those different endpoints. I can just optimize and change and play around with the privileges on each of these roles and dynamically sort of add new URIs using these different privileges. And yeah, that's the end of my live demonstration, and also the end of my, I would say, talk. Just switch back. Yes. Cool. And yeah, finish. If anybody has any questions and answers, or any questions, you guys can put them down below in the YouTube stream, and I'll actually answer quite a bit of them right now.
Cool. So we have 2 questions so far. Tim asked, in your redirect, your privilege redirect, is there a reason you're doing that in a loop for each role instead of doing a cached SQL lookup?
Answer Tim's question. At the moment when I was doing it, it was something I really needed to quite fast, and that was all I really knew, or the best way I knew at the moment on how to handle it.
Okay.
And then again, didn't want to sway a bit too far from what Laravel's already offering me. And then I just used the built-in models and model relationship functionality of Laravel to go through that in the middle there. Yeah, don't know if that answers this question.
Okay, well,
I think I saw Philip say, I mean eager load. Yeah, I meant eager load, sorry. Not lazy load, the privileges part.
Cool. Well, that seems to be all in the Q&A for now. Thank you very much, Tom. Great to see
Thank
this.
you.
I definitely need to refactor some of my roles.
Ah,
But
it will give you an opportunity.
yeah. Cool. So, next up, I'm gonna give a quick talk on role-based. Don't give a talk on role-based. I'm gonna give a talk on what the PHP community has built so far recently. Just small, interesting apps you can self-host or aid your business with. So, without further ado, let's go. So, the PHP community is pretty large. It's easy to become isolated within the bubble of your chosen framework or version or domain specific code. So, I'd like to take a quick look at some interesting PHP projects I've discovered over the years. Some of them are more well known than others, but definitely all of them deserve some love. And I have this available on my website, this talk, and the links to these projects will be there. Small disclaimer, I'm not affiliated with any of these projects, but I do use a few of them. First up, Grav CMS. It's a flat file, portable CMS. Logo seems to not be showing. Grav is an interesting alternative in the widespread CMS landscape. It's flat file based instead of database reliant, which for simple website makes getting from zero to deployed very quick. I've built my personal website in it, thecapecreek.co.za. There's no installation process overall required to get up and running. You can extract a zip file of the latest version and just start slamming out content. Configuration and accounts are stored in YAML files in the system, including your user login, which is encoded, or not encoded, it's encrypted while you set it, so you do have some of them will log into the admin panel. Caching permeates Grav's design, speeding up page delivery alongside JS and CSS pipelining to only serve single JS and CSS files. Meanwhile, themes are built in Twig with your content in Markdown and front matter, so it's quite developer friendly if you're used to Markdown for your GitHub readmes and your pull requests and whatnot. So overall, this makes it quite portable, and like I host the non-system parts of it, so all the content I have mine in a Git repo, and I just deploy that to my server whenever I make a new change, just so that I have that backup really. It has a plugin ecosystem and themes at getgrav.org. It's not necessarily as extensive as other popular CMSs, but there are still quite a few plugins there with interesting features, so you'll still have some analytics or some forms. You can attach a database to it if you really want to. So after that, we come to October CMS, which is a Laravel-based content management system with a focus on simplicity of the user experience, while still providing high-octane features for developers. I kind of think it's a bit of an understatement to just call it a CMS, since it seems to be a bit more involved than that. Like Grav, it uses Twig with a few extensions for templating instead of Laravel's Blade. This allows a lot of fine-grained control over what your final page will look like, while also being designer-friendly, because Twig is supposed to be a bit more designer-friendly and a bit safer overall. So the interesting bit with the themes and pages is that they can all be managed through October's backend itself without needing to dive into the code and deploy things constantly, although that is always an option. Installation or deployment of October is more akin to standard PHP systems, requiring certain PHP extensions and using a database. Like WordPress, it has an installation wizard to make life easier. Personally, what I find interesting with October is the intersection of providing a clean and understandable UX for non-technical people to be involved in the process, and the flexibility of a framework like Laravel to customize almost any aspect of the system. On top of that, developers are quite active in supporting the plugin ecosystem and have quite a few of their own default plugins for October, so you can get started with it pretty quickly. Obviously, there's quite a bit more that I haven't mentioned here, but it's definitely worth a look if you're looking for a different kind of CMS. After that, we come to Matomo, formerly Piwik Analytics. So there's more to PHP life than building CMSs, obviously. Matomo is a free and open source, that means GPL v3, fully featured alternative to Google Analytics, and is quite proud of that fact. Their main method of income is support contracts and cloud hosting of the platform, but you can self-host to get most of the feature set. The only thing you'll be missing out is more intricate features like A/B testing and SAML integration. So Matomo reports on your full dataset instead of a subset of it. So you can also get the benefit of full control and ownership of your generated data instead of letting Google have it all, and you may not be able to query it back later as easily as you'd like or generate new reports from it. So you can generate extra analytics on top of it, and I feel it's generally a bit of a boon to more privacy conscious developers. So when it comes to privacy, we have GDPR compliance in Matomo because it has its own GDPR manager interface, which has features like anonymization of data, the right to erasure, deleting historical data, and a few more things, which I'm pretty sure would make it mostly, if not fully, POPI compliant as well, which is important nowadays, since I believe POPI is now enforceable. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. So Matomo is a huge system, but it is worth the effort of installation if you go in the self-hosting route, and has relatively affordable pricing tiers otherwise. After that, we come to Nextcloud. So those of you may know Nextcloud or similarly OwnCloud. To be honest, I haven't looked into OwnCloud as much. Nextcloud is another alternative to Google Service, in this case Google Drive and other Google G Suite tools like Google Calendar. So as has become a pattern now, self-hosting Nextcloud is free, but you can pay for support and managed hosting. There are also client apps for all mobile and desktop platforms, which I find pretty useful. I run my own Nextcloud instance, and I have it on my PC, my laptops, and I even access it on my phone sometimes. So on top of that, you have your standard storage system, and you can also get your calendar. It has mail management, I believe, context, video calling, and there's a lot of stuff on the plugin ecosystem. So on my one, I've also installed the deck extension, which is basically a very simple Kanban board, which makes life a lot easier. Nextcloud offers extensive documentation related to its GDPR compliance and additional guides for administrators, so it makes life quite easy. I personally recommend it for those of you who want more control and privacy of your cloud system, or businesses requiring the same control of their data, which can be an issue sometimes. Installing Nextcloud is fairly straightforward. I mean, it's a PHP system with a relational database and just manages a few files, really. And there's quite a few guides out there to get started with. Next up, we have Monica, Personal CRM. This is a bit of an interesting project, I feel. So Monica came to my attention in the latter half of 2018. It's sort of a personal Rolodex for the web age, built in Laravel. Like Matomo, it's free and open source and free for self-hosting, but you can also sign up to the cloud version for simplicity. So how much do you actually use Facebook? You might think, why would I actually use this thing? And it's a valid question, really. But I'd ask you how much you actually use Facebook to track information on your friends, aside from just their birthday when it's on the sidebar, and not just for like an instant and endless feed of posts and memes. So it's not supposed to be a social network. It's purpose-built for managing your relationships and storing information that you want to remember on friends and family. You can store anything from relations between contacts, pets, debts owed, tasks related to a person, and more from its interface. From its website, it claims that Monica is for people who have jobs and a family and are busy trying to find a good work-life balance. So busy that they don't have time anymore to remember to call a friend, to say happy birthday to a nephew, or remember to invite someone to dinner next week. The older we get, the more life gets in the way, and it's sad, but it's a reality. So if you're not sure about this one, it does have the free version you can try out on the website as well, so it's definitely worth a look. Next up, second to last, we have Kimai, time tracking. Kimai is an MIT licensed open source time tracking system. Last year it came out with its V2, which was basically rebuilt from the ground up in Symfony. If any of you have heard of this project before, then you'll have seen the original version 1 UI, which was incredibly dated. When I first saw Kimai, I thought the project was pretty much abandoned because of how old it looked. So in V2, they moved up to Admin LTE, which is a pretty popular dashboard framework. So this also made it pretty mobile friendly as an added bonus. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately for those more inclined, it's only self-hosted, and their main income source is the extra plugins available in its marketplace, which I've seen quite a few things on there. Its default feature set is quite robust, however, because you already get like a JSON API for app integrations with other things, you get LDAP support, and other configuration options like switching between start and end time or duration only modes of time tracking. And if I remember correctly, it also has simple invoicing system or plugin that you can also use with it. So it's pretty good, especially for the lone gunman freelancers among us. Last but not least, we have Arendse events management. This was an interesting project because I haven't seen much else in this sort of space, especially in the open source section of it. Arendse is an open source event management and ticket selling platform using the attribution assurance license, which boils down to needing to display powered by Arendse on all pages. But this and other restrictions, like only being not being able to redistribute in software as a service products, can be removed by purchasing a license. So it's a bit of a different take compared to the whole managed versus self-hosted thing we see in most open source projects. So we have Stripe and PayPal support by default, so you can cover quite a wide range, and especially in South Africa where it's difficult to get payment providers that support everything, especially since Stripe seems to refuse to come out here. OmniPay is used as the payment processing system. Among Arendse's features are affiliate tracking, widget sharing for like including on other websites, a browser-based QR scanner for door management. I think it works on mobile as well. I believe that's a mobile API. And otherwise it has easy attendee management, including email messaging, which makes life quite easy. So that's it in terms of these projects. There are obviously a lot more out there. This talk is actually an article I wrote for 24 days in December last year, but I feel it still deserves some recognition because there's a lot you can do with all the self-hosted things out there. If you guys would like to take a look at more systems like this, there is an amazing website called opensource.builders. I'll post it in the chat as well. And you can filter there. They've added new filters, and you can see all sorts of free and open source alternatives to common commercial software. So it's definitely worth a look. And that's me. Let's see if we can get the raffle going, but first let me post. I assume my keyboard's a bit loud, but what can we do? Ooh. Hopefully this works and we only get people that are in the chat, but we'll see how it goes. Is this person here in the chat? I don't believe I've seen them. But yeah, otherwise I'll roll again. Is Tando here? Doesn't seem to be. Okay, I'll come up with another solution for the raffle. Again. It's a raffle for JetBrains license, if I didn't mention that. So thank you for coming out, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you at the next one. It'll probably still be online, given the current state of things. But yeah. So we came out pretty early on this one. If you'd like more PHP stuff, the Joburg PHP meetup, which you can find on meetup.com, is having their talk at 7, which I forget what it was on, but it's also going to be a pretty interesting one. So thanks for coming, guys. I'll sort out the raffle on ZA Tech. And otherwise message people on Meetup. Sorry. Cheers, guys.